My wife secretly sold my $25,000 fishing boat for $12,000. I exposed the forgery, collected evidence, used legal revenge, and walked out for good. From level to management, I had sacrificed weekends and holidays. All for this moment. Today was supposed to be the first day of the rest of my life, my retirement day, the day I could finally use the fishing boat I'd been restoring for the past 3 years. I pulled into my driveway with a smile on my face, thinking about how I'd spend tomorrow morning on the water, casting lines and enjoying the peace I'd earned. My colleagues had thrown me a small farewell party, and I couldn't wait to share the excitement with my wife. After all, she'd watched me work on that boat every weekend, sanding, painting, fixing the engine. She knew what it meant to me. Walking through the front door, I called out to her. No response. The house felt unusually quiet. I figured she might be out running errands, probably picking up something special for dinner to celebrate. I decided to check on the boat first, maybe run the engine one more time before taking it out tomorrow. I opened the garage door and froze. The empty space where my boat should have been stared back at me like a void. For a moment, I thought I was looking at the wrong spot. I walked around the garage, checking every corner, as if a 20-foot fishing boat could somehow hide behind some boxes. But there was nothing, just an oil stain on the concrete where my pride and joy used to sit. My heart started pounding. Maybe someone stole it. Maybe there was an explanation. I rushed back into the house and started calling her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. 20 minutes later, I heard her car in the driveway. I stood in the kitchen trying to control my breathing, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she moved it somewhere for safekeeping. Maybe she had it detailed as a retirement surprise. She walked in carrying shopping bags, humming softly to herself. When she saw my face, her expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, not surprise, not concern, something that looked almost like relief. "Where's my boat?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. She set down her bag slowly, deliberately. "Oh, that. I sold it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You what?" "I sold the boat. We got a good price for it. We can use the money for the house renovations we've been talking about." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say she was joking. But her face remained serious, almost defiant. "You sold my boat without asking me on my retirement day?" She shrugged. Actually shrugged, like she'd thrown away an old magazine instead of destroying 3 years of my work and dreams. "You never really used it anyway. It was just taking up space in the garage. Never used it. I've been working on it every weekend for 3 years. Today was the day I was finally going to take it out." "Exactly. 3 years. And you never took it out once. It was just a waste of money sitting there." The casual cruelty in her voice cut deeper than any shouting match could have. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was calculated. This was her deciding that my dreams, my plans, my retirement didn't matter. I looked at this woman I'd been married to for 15 years, and for the first time I really saw her the dismissive tone, the complete lack of remorse, the way she was already moving on to unpack her shopping as if this conversation was over. "Who did you sell it to?" I asked quietly. "Does it matter?" "It's done." But it wasn't done, not by a long shot. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. As I watched her put away her purchases like nothing had happened, something inside me crystallized. This wasn't just about a boat. This was about respect. This was about her thinking she could make decisions about my life, my property, my future without even the courtesy of a conversation. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. And unlike her, when I made decisions, I made sure people understood exactly what they meant. I didn't sleep that night. While she snored peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. By morning, I had a plan. If she thought she could just erase 3 years of my work with a casual transaction, she was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning, she left for her book club like nothing had happened. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, I got to work. I started in her office, looking through her papers, her computer, anything that might give me details about this so-called sale. What I found made my blood boil even more. Hidden in her desk drawer was a folder labeled "Boat Sale." Inside were printed emails dating back months. For months, she'd been planning this behind my back since before I even announced my retirement date. The emails were with someone called Rick from the marina. Not just any Rick, but Rick Henderson, her friend Linda's husband. They had negotiated a price of $12,000. $12,000. I'd put at least $25,000 into that boat between the purchase price and all the restoration work. The engine alone was worth more than what she sold it for. But the worst part was reading her own words in those emails. My husband is obsessed with this thing and never even uses it. I need it gone before he retires and has even more time to waste on it. Another email read, he'll get over it. Men always think their hobbies are more important than practical needs. Practical needs? I scrolled through our bank statements. We had over $40,000 in savings. We owned our house outright. We had no debt. What practical needs? When she came home that afternoon, I was sitting in the kitchen with the folder open in front of me. She walked in, saw the papers, and her face went white. Going through my personal things now? She said, trying to sound indignant, but I could hear the nervousness underneath. Personal things? You mean the evidence of how you've been planning to betray me for months? She sat down across from me, and for the first time since yesterday, she looked uncomfortable. I knew you'd overreact. That's exactly why I didn't tell you. Overreact? You sold my boat for less than half its value to your friend's husband. You planned this for months. You lied to my face every single day. I didn't lie. I just didn't see the point in arguing about something that needed to be done. Needed to be done? We have $40,000 in savings. We have no debt. What exactly needed to be done? She shifted in her chair. We need that money for retirement, for travel, for living. You can't just spend our golden years playing with boats. Our golden years? This is my retirement. We're talking about the thing I've worked 37 years for. And that boat wasn't playing. It was my plan, my dream. Dreams don't pay bills, neither do we. We're financially secure. This wasn't about money, and we both know it. She stood up, trying to regain control of the conversation. Fine. You want to know the truth? I was tired of watching you waste every weekend on that thing. I was tired of being married to someone who cared more about a piece of fiberglass than his own wife. There it was the real reason. Not money, not practicality. Control. She wanted to control how I spent my time, what I cared about, what brought me joy. And when she realized retirement would give me more freedom to pursue what I loved, she decided to eliminate it entirely. So, you thought you'd just make that decision for me? Someone had to be the adult in this relationship. That phrase hit me like a slap. The adult, as if working for nearly 4 decades, providing for our household, maintaining our home, and planning for our future, somehow made me the child in this equation. I stood up slowly, looking at this woman who had just revealed exactly what she thought of me, my judgment, my priorities, my autonomy. Tell me about Rick Henderson. What about him? How long have you two been discussing my personal business? Her face flushed. It's not like that. Linda mentioned he was looking for a boat, and I thought it would work out for everyone. Work out for everyone except the person who actually owned the boat. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been having private conversations about my property with another man, negotiating deals behind my back, and making decisions about my retirement without involving me at all. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Rick Henderson right now, and you're going to tell him the sale was unauthorized and needs to be reversed. I'm not doing that. The deal is done. The deal was made without the owner's consent. That makes it invalid. You can't prove that. I smiled for the first time in 24 hours. Actually, I can because you forged my signature on the title transfer. Her face went completely pale. In all her planning, she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I'd never fight back. The look on her face when I mentioned the forged signature told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't expected me to check the paperwork. She hadn't expected me to fight back at all. For 15 years, I'd been the accommodating husband, the one who kept the peace, who let small things slide for the sake of harmony. She'd mistaken patience for weakness. That was about to change. The next morning, while she was at work, I drove downtown and walked into the offices of Peterson and Associates, the law firm that had handled our house purchase years ago. David Peterson remembered me and listened carefully as I explained the situation. Document fraud is a serious matter, he said, reviewing the title transfer I brought with him. This signature doesn't match the one on your driver's license at all. She didn't even try to make it look authentic. What are my options? Several. We can pursue criminal charges for forgery and theft. We can file a civil suit to recover the boat or its fair market value. We can also explore whether this constitutes financial abuse, especially given the pattern of deception. Pattern of deception. Those words stuck with me as I drove home. This wasn't an isolated incident. Looking back, I could see it clearly now, the way she'd gradually taken over all our financial decisions, how she'd convinced me we couldn't afford things I wanted while spending freely on her own interests, the way she dismissed my opinions about our retirement plans while making unilateral decisions about our future. I spent the afternoon documenting everything. Bank statements showing her spending patterns versus her restrictions on mine, emails where she'd committed us to social obligations without asking me, photos of expensive purchases she'd made while telling me we needed to be more careful with money, a timeline of major decisions she'd made about our shared life without including me. By evening, I had a comprehensive picture of 15 years of gradual control and manipulation. The boat sale wasn't the beginning of this behavior. It was just the first time she'd been bold enough to do something so obviously wrong that I couldn't ignore it. When she came home, I was sitting in my study with all the documents spread out on my desk. She glanced in and saw me working but didn't ask what I was doing. She probably assumed I was sulking about the boat. "Dinner's in an hour," she called out as she headed upstairs to change. "I won't be joining you," I replied calmly. She stopped on the stairs. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm having dinner with Rick Henderson tonight. We have some business to discuss." I heard her footsteps coming back down quickly. She appeared in the doorway of my study, her face tight with concern. "You can't just call him. This is embarrassing." "Embarrassing for whom? You or him? For all of us. The deal is done. You need to accept that and move on." I looked up from my papers and smiled. "Actually, the deal is illegal, and Rick is about to find that out." "What do you mean, illegal?" "I mean, you committed forgery when you signed my name on that title transfer. I mean, you sold property that wasn't solely yours without the co-owner's consent. I mean, Rick is now in possession of stolen goods." Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words but couldn't find them. "I've spent the day with a lawyer. Did you know that in this state, forging someone's signature on a legal document is a felony? Did you know that selling someone else's property without authorization is theft? Did you know that Rick could face charges for receiving stolen property if he doesn't cooperate in making this right?" She sank into the chair across from my desk. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't what? Protect my own interests? Hold people accountable for breaking the law?" "You're right, the old me wouldn't have. The old me would have grumbled and complained and eventually let it go to keep the peace. But you made a mistake when you chose my retirement day to show me exactly what you think of me." I stood up and gathered the documents into a neat stack. "Rick is meeting me at the marina in 30 minutes. He's going to have a choice. He can return my boat and pretend this never happened, or he can deal with the legal consequences of being part of your little scheme. You're destroying our marriage over a boat." I stopped at the doorway and turned back to her. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that when you decided that my feelings, my property, and my dreams were worthless. You did that when you chose to lie to me for months. You did that when you committed a crime rather than have an adult conversation with your husband. It doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out." "You're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be like this. You could have talked to me 4 months ago when you first started planning this. You could have discussed your concerns about the boat like a partner instead of acting like a dictator. You could have treated me with the basic respect you'd show a stranger." I headed toward the door, then paused one more time. "But since you chose to handle this through deception and theft, we're going to handle the resolution through lawyers and legal consequences. You taught me that actions have consequences. I'm just a very good student." As I walked out to my car, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't look back. For the first time in 15 years, I was about to have a conversation where I held all the cards. And unlike her, when I played my hand, everyone was going to know exactly what the stakes were. Rick Henderson was waiting for me at the marina office when I arrived. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man who knew he was about to have an uncomfortable conversation. Good. He should be nervous. "Thanks for meeting me on short notice," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "Yeah, well, your wife said you might want to talk about the boat situation." His voice carried that forced casualness people use when they're trying to pretend everything is normal. "My wife said a lot of things, apparently. Let's take a look at my boat." I followed him down the dock to where my restored fishing boat sat tied to a slip. Seeing it there, knowing another man had been using what I'd spent 3 years perfecting, sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I kept my voice level. "Beautiful work on the restoration," Rick said, probably trying to butter me up. "Your wife mentioned you put a lot of time into it." 3 years every weekend, $25,000 in parts and materials. I ran my hand along the hull I'd sanded and painted myself. "Tell me, Rick, what did you pay for it?" He shifted uncomfortably. Well, we worked out a fair price, $12,000. I saw the paperwork. His face reddened. Look, if there's a problem with the sale, maybe we can work something out. I had no idea there were any issues. I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me and handed him a copy of the title transfer. Take a look at that signature. He studied it for a moment, then looked up at me with genuine concern. This doesn't look like your signature at all. That's because it isn't. My wife forged my name on the title transfer. She sold you a boat she had no legal right to sell. The color drained from his face. I had no idea. She said you were both eager to sell it. I'm sure she did. The problem is, Rick, you're now in possession of stolen property. My lawyer explained that in cases like this, the innocent buyer has two choices: return the property immediately or become complicit in the theft. He stared at the document, then back at the boat. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm giving you the chance to make this right before it becomes a legal matter. You can return my boat today and walk away from this mess, or you can try to keep stolen property and deal with the consequences. But I paid $12,000 for it. And that's between you and the person who took your money under false pretenses. My wife committed fraud when she sold you something that wasn't hers to sell. Your dispute is with her, not with me. Rick was quiet for a long moment, looking at the boat, then at the forged signature, then back at me. If I return the boat, what happens to my money? That's not my problem, but I'll tell you what happens if you don't return it. Tomorrow morning, I file a police report for theft and forgery. By afternoon, you'll be explaining to investigators how you came to possess stolen property. Your name will be in the police reports. Your neighbors will see squad cars in your driveway. Your wife, Linda, will have to explain to her friends why her husband is involved in a theft case. His hands were shaking slightly as he handed the papers back to me. I don't want any trouble. I just wanted a fishing boat. Then we understand each other. I'll have a trailer here in 2 hours to pick up my property. He nodded quickly. Yeah, okay. I'll get my stuff out of it right now. As I watched Rick scramble to remove his fishing gear from my boat, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. This was what decisive action felt like. This was what happened when you stopped accepting other people's poor choices and started enforcing consequences. I called my wife from the marina parking lot. She answered on the first ring. How did it go? Her voice was tight with anxiety. Rick will be calling you shortly about getting his $12,000 back. My boat will be back in our garage tonight. You can't be serious. We already spent some of that money. Then you'd better figure out how to unspend it. Rick has 48 hours to get his money back, or he'll be filing his own lawsuit against you for fraud. This is ridiculous. You're destroying relationships over a boat. I'm protecting my property from theft. There's a difference. I hung up and called David Peterson. The boat situation is resolved. Rick is returning it voluntarily, but I want to move forward with the other protections we discussed. I'll have the papers ready for you to sign tomorrow morning. Separate bank accounts, updated will, and a comprehensive documentation of assets. Are you sure you want to take this step? Completely sure. She's shown me exactly who she is. I'd be a fool not to protect myself accordingly. By the time I got home that evening, my boat was back in the garage where it belonged. But my wife was waiting for me in the kitchen, and she was furious. Rick called me screaming about getting his money back. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've recovered my stolen property and prevented a crime from being completed. You're welcome. You've humiliated me in front of our friends. Linda is mortified. Rick thinks we're criminals. You are a criminal. You committed forgery and theft. The fact that your friends now know it doesn't make you a victim. She slammed her hand on the counter. I am your wife. We're supposed to be a team. Teams communicate. Teams make decisions together. Teams don't commit crimes against each other. You stopped being my teammate the moment you decided to steal from me. I didn't steal anything. It was our boat. Wrong again. The title was in my name only. I bought it with my money before we were married. You had no legal claim to it whatsoever. Her mouth fell open. In all her scheming, she'd never bothered to check the legal ownership of what she was selling. Tomorrow morning, we're separating our finances completely. You'll have access to exactly half of our joint assets, and I'll have protection from any future unauthorized transactions. You can't do that. I smiled at her for the second time in 3 days. Actually, I can. And unlike you, when I make decisions about our shared life, I do it legally. As I headed upstairs, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her mouth still open, I realized something had fundamentally changed in me. For years, I'd avoided conflict to keep the peace. But peace built on one person's surrender isn't peace at all. It's just delayed justice. And justice, I was learning, felt a lot better than false peace ever had. 3 weeks later, we were at my retirement party. The company had organized a nice gathering at the country club with colleagues, friends, and family all there to celebrate my 37 years of service. My wife had been unusually quiet since the boat incident, trying to act like everything was normal, but I could see the anxiety in her eyes every time someone mentioned my retirement plans. She'd been banking on me keeping quiet about what happened, maintaining the facade of our happy marriage in front of everyone we knew. That was her mistake. She'd humiliated me privately and expected me to protect her publicly. Those days were over. I'd been planning this moment carefully. When the time came for speeches, I stood up with my drink in hand, looking out at the 50 or so people who'd gathered to honor my career. Thank you all for being here tonight. It means more than you know to have your support as I start this new chapter of my life. I paused, letting my eyes find my wife's face. She was smiling nervously, probably thinking I was about to give some sentimental speech about our life together. You know, retirement is supposed to be about finally having the freedom to pursue your passions. For me, that passion was a fishing boat I'd been restoring for 3 years. I put my heart, my weekends, and over $25,000 into making it perfect. A few people nodded appreciatively. Several of my colleagues knew about the boat project. I planned to take it out for the first time on my retirement day. I was so excited to finally use this thing I'd worked so hard on. My wife's smile was starting to look strained. She could sense where this was going. But when I got home that day, the boat was gone. My wife had sold it without telling me for $12,000 to a friend of hers. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Now, some of you might think this was just a miscommunication between spouses, but I found out she'd been planning this for months. She'd been emailing this friend's husband, negotiating the sale behind my back, telling him I was obsessed with the boat and that I never used it anyway. I could see people exchanging glances. My wife's face had gone pale, but I wasn't finished. The really interesting part was when I found out she'd forged my signature on the title transfer. See, the boat was in my name only, so she had no legal right to sell it. She literally stole my property and sold it to her friend's husband. Linda Henderson, Rick's wife, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Several other people were staring at my wife with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. I know what some of you are thinking. Why would a wife do something like that to her husband, especially on his retirement day? I took a sip of my drink, letting the question hang in the air. I asked her the same thing, and do you know what she told me? She said she was tired of being married to someone who cared more about a boat than his own wife. She said someone had to be the adult in our relationship. The silence in the room was deafening. My wife tried to interrupt. Honey, maybe we shouldn't. Shouldn't what? Tell the truth. Share what really happened. I turned back to the crowd. See, I thought this was about the boat. But then I started looking at our relationship more carefully, the way she'd gradually taken control of all our financial decisions. The way she'd dismiss my ideas about retirement while making unilateral plans for our future. The way she'd spend freely on her own interests while telling me we needed to be more careful with money. My sister, who was sitting at the front table, had her mouth hanging open. My brother-in-law was shaking his head in disbelief. I realized the boat wasn't the problem. The boat was just the symptom. The problem was that somewhere along the way, my wife decided that my opinions, my dreams, and my property were hers to control. My wife stood up abruptly. I think we should go home now. No, I think we should finish the story because this is where it gets interesting. She sat back down, her face red with embarrassment and anger. So I did what any reasonable person would do when someone steals their property. I got my lawyer involved. I made the friend return the boat. I separated our finances to protect myself from future unauthorized transactions. I looked directly at Linda Henderson. Your husband Rick was very understanding about the whole thing. He realized he'd been caught up in something he had no part in creating. He returned my boat and asked my wife for his money back. Linda's face was bright red now. Everyone at her table was staring at her. But here's the thing that really opened my eyes. When I confronted my wife about all this, when I showed her the evidence of her planning and scheming, when I explained the legal consequences of what she'd done, do you know what her response was? I paused again, making sure I had everyone's attention. She said I was destroying our marriage over a boat. She said I was being ridiculous. She said I was embarrassing her in front of our friends. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. She stole my property, forged my signature, lied to me for months. and then claimed I was the one destroying our marriage by holding her accountable for it. My wife's eyes were filled with tears now, but they looked more like tears of rage than remorse. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about that logic for a moment. If someone steals from you and lies to you and you call them out on it, are you the problem or are they? The crowd was completely still. Some people were nodding slightly. Others looked uncomfortable, but couldn't deny the facts I was presenting. I spent 37 years being the accommodating husband, the peacekeeper, the one who let things slide to avoid conflict. And where did that get me? It got me a wife who thought she could steal from me on my retirement day and face no consequences. I raised my glass one final time. So here's to retirement. Here's to finally having the freedom to surround myself with people who respect me enough to treat me honestly. And here's to my fishing boat, which is back where it belongs, and which I'll be taking out every single weekend from now on. I drained my glass and set it down. Thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you've learned as much from this experience as I have. As I walked toward the exit, the room erupted in whispered conversations. My wife sat frozen at her table, surrounded by people who now knew exactly what kind of person she really was. I didn't look back. I'd said everything that needed to be said. 6 months later, I was standing on the deck of my boat, watching the sun rise over the water. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The sound of my ex-wife's voice was no longer part of my daily routine. The constant tension of walking on eggshells around someone who saw my happiness as a threat was gone. The legal proceedings had gone exactly as my lawyer predicted. The forged signature made her position indefensible, and the documented pattern of financial control I compiled painted a clear picture for the judge. She tried to claim half of everything, including the boat, but the evidence showed a clear pattern of her making unauthorized decisions about marital assets. In the end, she got exactly what she was legally entitled to. Half of our joint savings, half the value of the house, and her own car. She did not get the boat she tried to steal, the retirement accounts I'd funded entirely myself, or any claim to the life I was building without her. The morning after the divorce was final, she'd called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. "Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we moved too fast with all this legal stuff." I sat in my kitchen looking out at the garage, where my boat sat safely locked away, and smiled. "We didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, several choices actually. You chose to steal from me. You chose to lie to me. You chose to forge legal documents rather than have an honest conversation with your husband. But we had 15 years together. Doesn't that mean anything? It means I wasted 15 years learning that you never respected me enough to treat me as an equal partner in our marriage. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. I can change." That word change, the same word she'd probably used with other men she'd manipulated over the years. "You had months to change. You had the opportunity to apologize, to make it right, to show some remorse for what you did. Instead, you spent that time trying to convince people that I was the villain for protecting my own property. I was embarrassed. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. I told the truth in front of everyone we know. If the truth was humiliating, that says something about your actions, not mine." There was a long pause on the line. "So that's it? You're just going to throw away everything we built together?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking at the boat that represented not just my hobby, but my refusal to be controlled. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally picking up the pieces of the man I used to be before I let someone convince me that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. You've changed. You're not the man I married." "You're absolutely right. The man you married would have grumbled about the boat and eventually let it go. The man you married would have accepted your apologies and your promises to change. The man you married believed that love meant accepting whatever treatment people decided to give him." I paused, watching a group of pelicans fly over the water in perfect formation. "But that man was a fool, and I'm not that man anymore. I hope you're happy with your precious boat." "I am. Every morning when I see it in the garage, I'm reminded that I'm worth fighting for. Every weekend, when I take it out on the water, I remember what peace feels like when you're not constantly worried about someone sabotaging your happiness. You'll regret this. You'll realize what you lost." That was her final attempt at manipulation, the suggestion that I'd made a mistake, that I'd lost something valuable when I divorced her. I know exactly what I lost. I lost the stress of never knowing when you'd decide to control some other aspect of my life. I lost the anxiety of wondering what you really thought about my interests and dreams. I lost the exhaustion of being married to someone who saw my happiness as a problem to be solved rather than a goal to be supported. I walked out to the garage and ran my hand along the side of my boat. And I know exactly what I gained. I gained the freedom to make decisions about my own life. I gained the peace of living with someone who respects me, that someone being myself. "Goodbye," she said quietly. "Goodbye." I hung up the phone and never heard from her again. That was 3 weeks ago. This morning, as I cast my first line into water that was perfectly still and quiet, I thought about how different my life had become. No more walking on eggshells, no more second-guessing my own judgment, no more accepting disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother. "How's retirement treating you?" I looked around at the perfect morning, the boat I'd restored with my own hands, the freedom to spend my time exactly as I chose, and typed back, like I always knew it could. The fish were biting. The sun was warming my face. And for the first time in 15 years, every decision about my day was entirely my own. I'd learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept treatment you wouldn't tolerate from a stranger. I'd learned that respect isn't something you earn through accommodation. It's something you demand through self-respect. But most importantly, I'd learned that retirement isn't just about leaving your job. Sometimes it's about retiring the version of yourself that accepted less than you deserved. And that man, the one who let his dreams be sold for $12,000 on his retirement day, was permanently out of service.